Hi, I'm Jeffrey.
And I'm Ed, and we're the Bitcoin coaches. In a previous video, we talked about what is Bitcoin. And it was basically just a brief overview of what exactly Bitcoin does.
On a very simple level, this video is going to get a little more philosophical, and we're going to discuss why Bitcoin is here and why Bitcoin could change the world. I know, deep, right? So, why Bitcoin? Our thesis statement for this video is that Bitcoin improves our current financial system through more efficient processes and the shifting of power.
First, let's talk about our current financial system. It's overly complex. We have all these major players trying to get their hands in the cookie jar. There's banks, there's payment processors, overdrafts, and there's fraud and crime. Literally everyone is giving their hard-earned money to the bank. So banks literally make millions of dollars off of our money, and they do that by lending it out to other businesses who then try to use that money to make a profit. But banks do have a benefit of their own. Banks are keeping track of all of these transactions and maintaining the account balances. Making sure that those account balances are correct and that there's no fraud is the benefit that banks provide. But as you know, there's literally thousands of banks. When a transaction between banks occurs, there's a period of time in which the bank verifies the validity of the transfer.
So not only is our current financial system overly complex, but there are 180 currencies in the world, and we live in a world economy. So how would I send money right now to my friend in China? Well, I'd need to use a third party, like a Western Union or a bank, and not only that, but we'd need to convert my US dollars to yuan. But let's take a look at that one more time, a little more realistically, a little more in depth. So, if I wanted to make this transaction, I would talk to my bank, who has been lending my money out to businesses and other people, making money off of it. They would then help me facilitate this transaction with the Western Union and my US dollars, who would then help us convert it into yuan, who would then send it to my friend in China's bank, who is lending their money out, making money off of it to businesses and other people. This whole process seems a little complex, and I get that there's a lot of different parties taking part in it. But very simply, we just wanted to ask, why does it have to be this complicated? And how long did that take? Now, this is just a transaction between me and my friend in China, but what if it's businesses? Time is money. I mean, we live in a world where we have satellites literally flying through space. We can take a little computer from our pocket, bounce a signal off the satellite and send it across the world, but we can't send money instantly? That doesn't make sense to me. Not only are there too many currencies in a world economy, but there's a lot of people who do not have access to banks. As of August 30th, 2017, per BusinessInsider.com, 2 billion people worldwide do not have access to a bank account or access to a financial institution via mobile phone or any other device. And I know when you're in a first world nation, that's not something you think about. There's banks on every corner, but it does affect a lot of people. This map actually shows countries where less than 15% of the population have a bank account. Less than 15%. And in a first world nation, sometimes it's, out of sight, out of mind, but that's not the type of world we should be living in, especially with a world economy, and then especially just doing the right thing. Okay, but if people don't have access to a bank, how would they really be able to use cryptocurrency? It's kind of an incomplete solution, right? Not exactly. When you take a look at this chart, the blue bar represents people over the age of 15 using mobile phones to receive money. The red bar represents commercial bank branches per 100,000 people. As you can see in Kenya, over 60% of the population over the age of 15 are using mobile phones to receive money. And there really aren't enough commercial bank branches per 100,000 people to help care for them all, to help service them all. If you take a look at the bottom of this chart in the world, there are commercial bank branches everywhere. Think about Europe, think about North America, and there are significantly less people using mobile phones to receive money, and that's because they don't need to. We have ATMs, we have debit cards, we have banks on every corner. So that may not impact people in first world nations that much, but it certainly does affect other countries. And not only that, but I want to talk about inflation for a moment. And I get that Bitcoin is far too volatile now in 2018 for it to be a solution to inflation. But if it does get universally accepted due to the finite amount, it can solve that. And plus, right now we're just talking about our current financial system. I want to ask a simple question. If everyone in the US tried to withdraw their money all at once, what would happen? There'd be panic. There'd be chaos on the streets, and banks would probably close their doors. And that's because we haven't been backed by the gold standard since 1971 when President Nixon took us off of it.
Yes, and that contributes to inflation because what happens when the government needs money? So, we're going to briefly introduce the Fed here. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the Fed, feel free to pause this video and take a look at this image. But for right now, we're going to talk about the 12 Federal Reserve banks. So a little bit of info about the Fed. The reserve banks are considered quasi-governmental, or legally private but functionally public, because they are owned by commercial banks in their region. About 34% of the commercial banks in the US are members of the Federal Reserve System.
So who's really in charge of the Federal Reserve System? The reserve banks aren't directly supported by tax dollars. Instead, they are primarily financed by interest earned on the Fed's portfolio. And any excess earnings must be transferred to the US Treasury. Oh, so any excess earnings are transferred to the US Treasury. So that makes it legit, right? But don't those commercial banks own the reserve banks? So wouldn't that technically give them control of our nation's money?
So yes, there's that. And only 10% of all US dollars were actually printed and in circulation in 2017. So that means we're already using digital money. The concept of digital money with Bitcoin, it's not something that's that new. In 1917, the US dollar had an inflation rate of about 19.17%. So even us as a first world nation are not immune to inflation. But what if Bitcoin wasn't meant to save first world nations? What if it was actually meant to save those less fortunate? In 2017, through corruption in the Zimbabwean government, Zimbabwe had an inflation rate of 652%. So if milk was $1 in 2016, it was then worth $6.52 in 2017. That's a crazy amount of inflation. Now let's talk about why Bitcoin is more efficient. So in our current system, we trust a bank to keep track of all of our transactions. With Bitcoin though, there is no bank. With Bitcoin, it's for the people and by the people. Anyone can send or receive Bitcoin with no bank and no third party. It can be sent directly, instantly, and cheaply, and it can be used for purchases, to send money to a friend, or as a store of value.
And traditionally, we've had all these options available to us, but they're run by banks or companies profiting off of our money. Bitcoin is run by the people, and it's tracked by the blockchain. The blockchain replaces the banks. We mentioned this in our previous video. The blockchain is the cloud 2.0. The cloud is an off-site server. The blockchain is essentially a distributed off-site server. This is a centralized system where if that middle computer goes down, the system's in trouble. In a distributed system, if one of the computers goes down, the network continues and can move forward. The distributed ledger securely tracks all network transactions in place of a bank, and all transactions are transparent. You can look them up online anytime. The blockchain system makes virtually no errors. It's because of the transparency. And it's arguable that it's more secure than our current banking system because it's decentralized. And we'll get into that in a second.
So not only is the ledger distributed, it's also open source. The algorithms that process transactions can be independently verified. They're also transparent, they can be viewed by anyone. And because it's open source, if a new threat to the network becomes apparent, the code can be updated as needed. With banks, that would all be done behind closed doors and no one would know about it. So now let's go back and take a look at how Bitcoin is more efficient. Remember this transaction? Here we're sending money to a friend in China. To do that, we need to use a third party like Western Union or a bank to convert US dollars into the Chinese yuan. With Bitcoin, it's a lot more efficient. All we do is we take our Bitcoin and our Bitcoin wallet and send it to the friend simply by using his Bitcoin address. It's as simple as that. You send the money in the form of Bitcoin and it's done.
So why Bitcoin? Ed mentioned why it's more efficient, but it also shifts the power. If a central authority wanted to commit fraud, a central authority like a bank or a government wanted to commit fraud, who could stop them? With a distributed ledger, one party does not have the power. It's equally distributed.
Exactly. At any given moment, we can look up online and see where all the Bitcoin is. We can clearly see here that Alice would have 5.3 Bitcoin. We can see when and where it was sent. But we don't actually see Alice. What we really see is Bitcoin addresses. The blockchain prevents fraud by maintaining transparency through a distributed ledger and by using cryptography to protect each individual transaction.
Here's an example of a cryptographic key. Let's say I wanted to send Ed a secret message that's ABC, but I wrote 012. With this key, it's very easy to figure out because each number would represent a letter in the alphabet. Without the key, you could be looking at a code for hundreds of years and not be sure what it is. That's the concept of the cryptography behind Bitcoin.
So basically, cryptography is just a giant puzzle. And once the answer to the puzzle is found, it is transmitted to the rest of the network, confirming the correct transaction. The blockchain always reflects what the majority says, and the transaction is added to the blockchain permanently. So to commit fraud, you'd basically need to have a majority of the network.
So the other day, we came across this tweet, and credit where credit's due, parabolic troll, and we found it to be kind of profound. Banks don't want you to use Bitcoin for the same reason the Postal Service didn't want you to use email. It's that simple. It's because individuals in power aren't going to give it up that easily. And you guys have been patient. You've learned what Bitcoin is, and you've heard our theoretical discussion on why Bitcoin could change the world. Again, here's the quick 5-point answer to what is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is digital money. Its purpose is to send money from person A to person B without the use of a third party like a bank. All legitimate transactions are tracked on the distributed ledger, aka the blockchain. The blockchain is people all over the world using computers to keep track and confirm legitimate transactions. Its software is open source, meaning any programmer can suggest how to make updates.
So in conclusion, why can Bitcoin change the world? It's because Bitcoin improves on the current financial system through more efficient processes and the shifting of power. We're the Bitcoin coaches.
Thanks for watching. And you have all those debates where people are like, why is Bitcoin important? Share this video with them.
And if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe so you can see all of our future videos. Thanks for watching.